So I want to talk, today we're going to talk about every startup relies on technology to build digital products in this environment. While founders and early stage companies have identified a market and a problem set and figured out a solution to that, taking those solutions to the next step requires really stepping back and creating the technology and infrastructure for delivering the product, for, be it email, be it IT infrastructure, artificial intelligence, with customer bots or as part of your product management. There's, the list continues. And it's very important to get those all lined up ahead of time. And I'd also like to mention that when we talk today, we're really talking about standalone startups. There's a big movement within the industry in large and mid-sized companies to have initiatives that treat projects within their companies as small startups, and to disrupt parts of their market or their company. Those are really handled very differently than how startups, standalone startups operate, because the resources that you kind of take for granted that you'd have in a big company, you don't necessarily have those to lean on in startups. So we can talk about it a little bit in the question and answer if there's time, but we were trying to focus on standalone startups here. I would like to introduce the panelists. We have Dev Wara, if you want to speak a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Dev Wara, I'm a client service lead at a consulting firm called Slalom out of Boston. We really focus on helping our clients build new products, transform their current capabilities, and take it to market. In my past, I've had experience working in a data engineering startup. That was already in my career. I had my own startup in a B2B space in the commerce, in the e-commerce area that I launched, and had a lot of learnings from there that I hopefully can bring to this conversation.
Great, thanks. The next we have is Sid Probstein.
Hi, thanks. I'm Sid Probstein. I'm the CTO at Keeb. I have been lucky enough to work in the startup world for a few decades now at companies like Tivio, which was acquired by ServiceNow, Fast Search, which was acquired by Microsoft, Knowledgeant, which was acquired by Accenture, some startups like Freemark Mail, you might remember Juno, and I just happen to love the space and the excitement of it. I'm in it for the glory. Great to be here to talk about Roadmap today.
Great, thanks. And Sapna Tyagi.
Thanks, Lynn. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Also, a big thank you to Startup Boston for hosting us. I'm Sapna Tyagi. I'm the Chief Product Officer at HivePro. We are a cybersecurity startup in seed stage right now, gearing up for Series A. I'm also a venture partner at NextGen Ventures. So throughout my career, I've spent about half of the time, about a decade, building enterprise and SaaS products at companies like TripAdvisor, Care.com, and Precedence, and the other half building consumer products at Microsoft and my own startup. So I've done all kinds of product management, hardware, software, big company, small company, across a breadth of industries. And each of my prior experiences has helped me prepare for the next role. So today's discussion, I look forward to drawing from some of these experiences and sharing how we navigated around the technology framework.
Great, thank you. And I guess, so I'll give some of my background. I've been, probably half of my career has been in large companies such as Motorola and 3Com in the telecom space. And the second half, I've been doing startup companies, NeoQuest Technologies, which was purchased by Telestream. And I'm currently at a startup called Screens, located just south of Boston. We make a video platform that's doing very well. I've got same thing, hardware, software background, product management, customer service and support. So I've seen all aspects of the growing a company from zero, going from 0 to 150 million and beyond. So with that, I'll get into our first question. So what technology capabilities do founders need to think about when building out the product in this ad hoc environment with no existing playbook or guidance as to how to do that. And we'll go to Dev first.
Yeah, so I think of this in a couple of different ways. Clearly there's a lot from a tech standpoint, there's a lot of options that founders have available today that are easily accessible, more so today than like say 10, 15 years ago, with cloud capabilities, AI, machine learning, and so on. However, I feel like there's a thought process that should go in terms of three key buckets. One is really focusing around making sure that you're building something that's usable. So that's like, as you know, everyone knows, that's early stage of a startup. You really want to make sure your product's valuable, usable in the market. The second category of thought around what capabilities to use is making sure that it's flexible. First 12 to 18 months, there's probably a significant level of pivots that you might need to make as part of your startup. So having a tech platform that is really open and flexible, can integrate into the client's environment. If it's like a B2B process, that would be really something important to think about. And then the third piece is, once hopefully you get the traction in the market, something that allows you to grow and scale. So a platform and a framework that really allows you to scale beyond some of the initial MVP capabilities that you deliver. So I would think of it in those three key buckets.
Those are important. Sid, do you have anything to add?
Oh, absolutely. I think you've got to be using frameworks, not building them, right? Especially early on with those explorations with customers, you're trying to prove the value and see if people will engage with it. You should be building an app and consuming as much as possible. I think the question of framework is very important. Are you a B2C venture? Then you need to worry a little bit about your own security perimeter more, and privacy, is your own thing. If you're B2B, you need to worry a little bit more about things like data residency, compliance issues. If you're selling to financial services, right, there's some complexity. There's even more complexity in something like HR or in life sciences or healthcare, where you may have very sensitive data. So consider carefully, right? Should I build this in the cloud, assuming that my customer, the customer I desire, will be able to give me that data set? Or should I be thinking I need something I can deliver to them, maybe in their cloud environment or even on premises, if I need to initially make sense of data? So there's a lot to think about in that regard. I think it's also critical to consider the team. What skills do you have aboard? Are you aligned with the framework that you want to pick? It's, I think, okay to pick a new framework as long as you're designed for success. Put the time in to train the team, to experiment and learn, and don't have brutal startup timelines that don't account for something like learning a new language. And I think folks have talked about the benevolent dictator model. In the case of getting alignment, that's much more valuable if the whole team can work together quickly, even if it's not quite in the perfect or ideal environment. So I think that's another important point, just to build on what Dev's saying.
Yeah, that is. Sapna?
Sure. So I want to build on what some of the things that Sid mentioned. So want to bring in the angle of compliance and in heavily regulated industries like healthcare. So most people know that for healthcare, beyond HIPAA compliance is required nationwide. But beyond that, there are very nuanced, state-specific, and even healthcare vertical-specific regulations. So understanding those early on and aligning those or mapping those with the capabilities of the technology platform that you're considering or the framework you're considering is really important, because a mistake made here can be, at this stage, can be very expensive for the company because switching a technology framework can be really expensive. So at Virtudent, for example, Virtudent is a teledentistry teledentistry startup providing preventative dental care services. So we used G Suite for our email and document management. So our natural, choice for a cloud provider was Google Cloud Platform. But as we dug into our industry regulations and our specific workflows that were unique to our company, we realized that AWS was a better partner for us, and we made that decision. So it's the IT infrastructure is one level, but beyond that, there's other industry-specific platform considerations that you have to make. So for our industry, we have a practice management software, which, there are about 15 plus players that are top players building it for many, many years. And for us, that was, being in the service industry, that was not a core competency. So we decided to partner, or we decided to, get a third-party practice management software. One of the things we realized, though, as we were evaluating 15 plus, we talked to 15 plus vendors, and all of them had, feature parity, all the bells and whistles. But as we dug in deeper, there are two things or two criteria that was really helpful in filtering them to 1 to 2 finalists. The first one was around having a clear understanding of our workflows and getting internal alignment on those before working with the third party. So having an alignment and then talking to the vendor about meeting those needs, making sure if they can address those specific use cases. So for us, we were a mobile company, so we needed a mobile partner. But majority of the practice management softwares were not cloud-based and did not have a mobile UI. So that narrowed down our options. And the other thing that was really useful was asking for a sandbox. So even if some companies don't offer sandbox experience, asking for a pilot phase before going into a long-term contract goes a long way, not just in cost efficiency and time efficiency, but also it's an opportunity to involve the cross-functional stakeholders who may end up becoming power users of that platform in their day-to-day lives in the future.
Well, that's great. I guess to summarize it, it seems like as you're in that first stage of converting to a product into a company, also understanding what the core competency and secret sauce of your company is versus what is something that you can kind of give way and use something open source or use something else. And then as well, there's a trade-off between what's part of the infrastructure of the company versus what is actually part of the product. And it was interesting to hear you say about, oh, we should go with GCP because they're doing all our infrastructure. Those are big decisions to make. And then back to Dev's point about the 3 buckets to keep in mind, being with usable versus being able to be flexible and pivot and be concerned about growth and scale. Those are all really good points. And now for all of you, considering that the initial first 2 years are so critical to a startup and that startup success, how should the technology align with the product and strategy roadmap from a 1 to 2 year perspective? Sapna, do you want to continue?
Sure. So when you think about the technology solutions, a lot of things, there are always a lot of things you could build. Every month, most people can relate to this. Every month, there's a new shiny object that the team wants to build. And engineers are the first in line because they love building stuff. So to keep teams focused and aligned, the approach I like to start with, or I've used this very often, is start with a 1 to 3 year strategic imperatives for your company. And these could be, depending on the company and the product or space you're in, these could be product market fit, customer experience, your tech IP, your growth, both vertical, horizontally, or in terms of customers or revenue. And then it could also be building your brand or your competitive moat. So if you are all of these, this is just an early list, but the list could go on, identifying what those strategic imperatives are, aligning the leadership at the company on these and the company overall on these before you make your technology investments. So for example, how this applies is if you are a service company, growth is way more important in the first year than tech IP. But then by year 3, you may need to start thinking about building your tech IP because you need that to support your growth and help you scale. Otherwise, you might get disrupted by another competitor in the space.
Oh, that's interesting. Sid, what do you think?
So I think it's a great area to focus on, that the first kind of first few years of roadmap. I think the key is to really get engagement. Um, I love the shiny object analogy, and too often, right, the shiny objects persist because there are not enough customers saying, I like that one and I don't like this one, and I'd like more of this one. So I think getting engagement, essentially being intimate with the customer so that you hear what they like, what they don't like, you hear the problems that they're trying to solve, you understand the reality that they face. And that's very hard to map when you're sitting in a startup company, considering the problem of an operational person in a large company. We don't have quite the same experience. We don't have all of those connections necessarily to deal with as a developer, especially. So the engagement's key. You really need the engagement, and along with that, you've got to have instrumentation. I would argue that the ability to scale a platform is somewhat less important. I'm always mindful of the old IBM commercial that somebody forgot to tell the web people. We don't want to be in that situation and be unscalable, but you really need to be able to instrument the system so that you can understand what customers are doing with it and how they're solving the problem and where you can focus your efforts. The data will help eliminate the shiny object problem or distraction. It drives the investment, because if you have data around revenue and you have data around how customers convert and what they use in the product, right, that's how you can build a really strong investment case. So I think focus on engagement and scale after you nail that formula, right? Prove the product market fit.
Dev?
Yeah. Just to build on that, I feel not forgetting the product management, product owner function here in the first year is really critical. As technical founders, very often, we are focused on that shiny object, all the cool stuff you can do with technology that you have access to today, but really figuring out how you're going to run those initial experiments, minimal viable experiments, to test your assumptions. Perhaps, you started with a product that was B2C focused, but then you're trying to learn from the market to see that's not working out. It might be an uphill battle. So move into a B2B sort of a model. Having that engagement with the product teams and investing only what's really necessary to build out your core IP and to validate that you have a useful platform or a product. I think that's really key for the first year or two. And then scale definitely comes in further down the road.
It's good. And I guess having been in product development and for a number of years, I feel that's one of the big changes that has occurred is traditionally products have been built out to within an inch of their life, documented, specified, every feature complete before you actually do get in front of a customer, which is why you have product life cycles that are so much shorter now. You could have done the best market research, but it isn't, you get it in front of the first customer or the first couple of customers, and it takes a whole different life, and different sticky things come on. So to summarize, I think what we're all saying is getting that first engagement and intimacy with the first couple of customers that you can get validation and proof points across and do those minimum viable experiments. And then more, or as importantly, is to instrument it, to have the data and the metrics to be able to prove to investors that this is worth continuing going to the next step with. Okay, so the next question, with multiple choices of technology, how should startups approach the all-important buy versus build versus partnership decision? And which approach do you feel should take precedence? Sid, do you want to go first?
Sure, happy to. I think it's a super important question. And over the last 20, 30 years, it's changed a lot. It has to be that the default is to buy or integrate a service. You shouldn't build something that isn't core to you. I recently met with a startup that wanted to build their own dashboarding engine, and that didn't seem like the right choice. But when they talked it through, they identified some customer requirements that actually were kind of unique. And so they opted to go with a framework and build new plugins for that. So I think that's just an example where, always try to build as little as possible. But there's another question, which is about partnerships. And I believe that partnership now is an essential element of a successful startup, you can't necessarily have all of the skill sets that you need. Maybe if what you're doing is very narrow, you can assemble them, but you also might need user interface or integrations or to participate in different ecosystems like various stores. That all takes more. Partnering to get into those ecosystems to obtain expertise that's very costly, that maybe doesn't want to take the risk profile of a startup, it's a great way to drive a startup quickly and to get kind of sophisticated capabilities without having to go through the lengthy hiring, building software development process. So at Keeb, we've been doing a lot of that, at least trying to stay to a 50-50 ratio and using a network of experts around the globe to help us. And I feel like that's a great way to both manage the spend on fixed price contracts with experts, and also to make sure that you keep your team focused on what's going to move the needle for you. So I think buy and build is essential. The default has got to be on buy and integrating, and then absolutely look to partner, build it into your system early on. If you design for success and you cultivate expertise in working with partners, bringing in their artifacts, having them participate in your development community, it really accelerates things.
Dev, do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, I think it's really a buy / partner and build combination. As I see it, clearly you want to build your IP that you have, and it doesn't necessarily mean you build all of it from ground up. For instance, if it's like an AI kind of a solution, you might really leverage capabilities that are out there in the market in terms of data mining, machine learning algorithms, but then build your industry-specific intelligence into that platform on your own. You train on your own data and so on. So that's really your core IP. So that's kind of you're building, but you're still leveraging what's out there in the market. So you're not starting from scratch. And the other angle is really partnering. Let's say if you're a fintech, I saw some questions around fintech pop up in the chat as well. But if you're a fintech, let's say you're financial management software or an app that you're trying to create, partner with the ecosystem that's out there that allows you to get access to that information through APIs. So there's several vendors that provide services, subscription-based services that you can use out there that you can partner with and really build your core IP and your experience. Perhaps that's your go-to-market secret sauce around this.
That's great. Sapna?
Sure. So great points by both Dev and Sid. To me, build versus buy versus partner is a strategic decision. So when it comes to your core competencies, I would say start building it right away, because if you don't, you may have a hard time fundraising. But for peripheral services like IT infrastructure and other cloud-based services, your DevOps, your A/B testing platform, that are critical for your success, but not unique to your value proposition, I would say go with partnering option. And the question then, and Dev touched on this as well, that sometimes you're building an IT or AI solution, and that is directly competing with a framework you're using. Should you build it or not? And I would say that, build it, because build it, but partner with the AI platform as well. As long as you keep your focus on, your secret sauce, your tech IP, you can use an existing framework. So you need to have something that basically, some unique competency that will keep you running in the business. So for example, at HivePro, we build vulnerability detection, we orchestrate vulnerability detection. And one of the things we are doing is we have our secret sauce is the scoring engine we've built, which essentially scores the vulnerabilities from multiple tools or providers that customers are using, and gives them a score. And then we are adding a layer of predictive analytics to it to detect these proactively. So that's our secret sauce here. We are still using the AWS, AI engine. We are still using data elements from the existing data models to build on our models on top of that. But we, for example, asset information for our customers, that's unique to us. So we are using a combination, but what we are building is not replicatable by anyone else, and that is important. So when it comes to partnership, there are a few challenges to be aware of. So first of all, getting into partnerships, they're thinking about contract negotiation is it's a very challenging space, because not only are you looking at multi-year complex partnership agreements, but sometimes a potential partner right now, 2 years down the line, they could be a competitor. So you want to make sure you're not signing or getting into contracts that are that prohibit you from building that in the future, that capability in the future in-house. So thinking about that proactively. A few other things to keep in mind when considering the build versus buy versus partner decision is, the cost. So most people think of cost, especially I've seen that in startups where people are thinking about costs upfront or the initial cost, but not thinking about the ongoing or maintenance cost, which can be sometimes that's missed from the budgeting plan. And important to think about that upfront, because that's always a surprise that's not welcome. And the other thing is around resourcing. So the resource needed, if you partner with Salesforce or AWS, that's a specific skill set. You need the resource internally who serves as who's the evangelist internally for that third-party framework, and also serves as a subject matter expert. And that person is not the same person, or does not have the same skill set that's needed to build the capability in-house. So planning for that and that resource is important.
Good, thank you. Those are actually really good points. And I wanted to I guess, say in terms of the buy versus build versus partnership, the decisions really have to be made in the context of technical talent or talent is very, very tight, and you're fighting other startups and other industries for that talent, and that's really huge in making your decision. You're also making the trade-off of you need to really jump in and grab market share, and what are those key features between buy, build, and partnership are going to help you to grab that market share. In terms of buying, if it's core to your business, and that like it's your secret sauce or your lockout spec, then I definitely think you really need to think about building it so that you can be sticky within the customers. And kind of to your points, Sapna, they need you and can't get it anywhere else, and that's what you really want to work for. But if you do put something in the buy bucket, just because you don't do it, I think it's really important to evaluate if you need it. We typically have, infrastructure things. We'll use open source tools like a Slack open source instead of things that are licensed. Can you get away with open source, or just do you need to really do things the way that you've always done them before? Is really important. And then with partnerships, I agree that it's a double-edged sword with partnerships, and you have to go in as you're both working together, and you are a partnership, but you do have to protect your stickiness and that partner isn't going to take you under or just use all your resources to develop what you're developing now. So it's a fine line to make that a successful relationship. Does anyone else have something to add? Or
the only thing I would add is, as a startup, you constantly need to go through this buy, build, partner decision-making process, because as you the first few years, you're learning so much about your platform, what you earlier thought was your IP, but perhaps the market gave you feedback that it's not necessarily unique out there. You've pivoted in a slightly different direction. I would just advise startups to continuously go through that process in deciding and not kind of cast it in stone upfront and then not change that strategy going forward.
Yeah, I think you keep bringing up the word pivot, which I think is really important in startups because it's a constant adjustment as you get that feedback and resources change and velocities change. Okay. This is so now we're gonna dive into the all important. What do you guys feel the composition of teams should look like within your companies, and how does outsourcing play a key role in those strategies? Sapna?
Sure. So realistically, I'll touch on the outsourcing piece. Realistically, most startups will not have the resources to hire every person they need in-house. You'd like to, but there's hardly a case where you have everyone in-house. So I've seen two models, or the model that I've seen work really well if you want to outsource your development is hire the leadership in-house or internally. I don't want to say locally because everyone is remote right now, but internally hire the leadership and outsource the IC, individual contributors. And when I say leadership, it's not the level, it's people building critical functionality for you. So architects, and definitely the leaders, directors and above, and managing the teams, who building the culture of the team. Those people should be hired, and it's also important for the outsourcing model to work to have an engineering director or a program manager leader counterpart at the outsourcing firm, because that is the person who's going to keep the communication going and translate your customer needs and your product roadmap accurately to the engineering outsourced engineers. If you work directly with the engineers, I've seen the communication channel break down very often. So Care.com and Precedence both use these models slightly different way. At Precedence, the co-founder of the outsourcing firm was a tech architect, and that person was the primary contact for my team. And we basically interacted with that person, and they assigned the relevant resources we needed to do our development. It was very cost efficient. And at Care.com, the model was slightly different. All individual contributors were hired in-house in India. There were some vendors also, so they were in-house and vendors, but all IPs were in India. And there was one local director in India who had spent some time at HQ and then decided to move overseas. Other than that, all the directors and VPs were at the HQ. And how that helped was, they were representing the engineering organization to the SLT and the rest of the company, and vice versa. And that really helped drive the code quality, engineering morale, and engineering felt that they had a skin in the game, which sometimes is missed when you go with the outsourcing model.
Okay. Dev, would you like to speak?
Yeah, just to add to that, I would just go back to that whole product owner, team member on the team that really understands the market, understands the opportunity, the need, and it has experience going back and validating those assumptions that are being made by the organization, right? Because there's a significant investment that's being made as a startup. You really want that customer's voice and feedback loop in the process. So that role, although not necessarily technical, is very critical in my mind as your kind of early stages. And from an outsourcing standpoint, I agree with Sapna. Having that support is really valuable, depending on the startup. Really working with a like-minded firm with the right skill sets, that can bring that capability and basically be an extension to your engineering arm. And as you scale, there will definitely be opportunities to, assuming that's going well, to leverage that to help you scale as well.
Sid?
Yeah, I can only add to that outsourcing is definitely, or partnering or whatever it is definitely something you've got to be careful about, and you have to design to succeed. I think it's important to think of the Dungeons and Dragons model, if you will, where you have wizards and you have fighters and you have thieves and you have priests or whatever, you know, all these different roles. And we have those too in engineering. The trick is, right, there's an arbitrage going on, that there's always a different price. Data scientists today are off the chart. Cybersecurity people are off the chart expensive. As a startup, bootstrapping, you may not be able to access, you know, one of the more senior people out there right away. So that's where, you know, some kind of an outsourcing model for wizards. But that doesn't mean you don't also need people to take the artifacts that wizard's going to create and deliver them through your product, right? So you have to be thoughtful about which roles can I access, which pieces can I fill myself. That's one part. The other piece is, it's got to be someone's job if you're going to do outsourcing. A easy startup mistake to make is think you understand the business problem and you can just work with the technology firm that will deliver for you. And especially on an hourly rate, that quickly becomes a mutual mess. It's not so much, you know, the firm will probably do their best, but at the end of the day, they've been trained around, you know, boxing the product, right? Trying to put some limits on it and making assumptions. And when those things don't align, that's where things stop and rework occurs and design occurs and on your dime. So I think designing for it is the most important piece to be successful. If you aren't doing it, I think it's sometimes an indicator that something's not quite healthy or thought through. Very few startups, I think, have the luxury of having all the things they need early on.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you said, especially just saying, okay, I'm outsourcing and putting that in the bucket and saying, oh, it's done it's really not a thing. It's an ongoing, that's another set of employees that you have. They just don't happen to reside, you know, within the bounds of your pay structure, your employee pay structure. And you really have to manage it so that you know that you're getting what you're asking for. And you do need someone on both sides of the fence that are very technical. You can't just say I'm a business person and just go hire a technical team. You really need to understand and be able to play a role in that architecture so that you know that it's scalable, to the degree that you need, and you don't box yourself into a corner. I think what's also important when you're picking something like that is really paying attention to like where they're located and what you're comfortable with working with. Like time zones can play a huge part in this. You work with a team that's 4 hours, 6 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours away. You can lose days in schedules very easily with not paying attention to that up front. And whereas local resource can be very expensive, we've also had a lot of luck at the startups I've been with, where we'll have a couple of contractors that we know that we can trust, and we can bring them up and down as we needed based on where we're on in the product. And I know we've talked mostly about engineering resources for contractors, but customer service is also another one. I know we've talked about AI bots or customer support. Does any of you guys have thoughts on that besides engineering roles?
I think I do have thoughts on the strategic role. So one thing that startups don't often, I would say, leverage as much as they can is their investor in the local ecosystem. So I'm a venture partner at NextGen Ventures, and I'm available to a lot of all the startups in our portfolio to dive into any strategic areas they need consulting help with. And NextGen Ventures has a lot of venture partners with unique domain expertise, and every investment firm has people with a lot of strategic experience who startups can easily tap into, and within the local ecosystem, there are people who would be willing to hop on a call, give you advice, things that they've done before, instead of reading documents online and trying to figure things out. It's always great to reach out to people in your local ecosystem.
I would, sorry, go ahead, Sid.
So I just wanted to follow on real quickly and say, I think customer experience and the engagement with the platform is a tech product problem. You can build the perfect product, but if somebody isn't there helping the customer the moment when they don't understand something you think is obvious, when you aren't able to show trends or how far into the product people are able to get, when you don't identify where they end their sessions and begin their sessions, you aren't really supporting the customer correctly. Another thing I love mention of bots, when you're doing engagement, you have to offer the customer every possible way to express their feelings, especially in that early phase, that first 1 to 2 years. So having a bot is a lot better than having a sales engineer, right? Even if the bot is just connecting to someone who is going to take the message, you will learn a lot from that. So I think thinking about and integrating the customer experience and how you're going to manage that and how you're going to promote your product and how you're going to refine your product, you have to integrate that with the product, and you have to design to make the customer success person who you should insist is there, right? To make them really successful. You don't want them to become yet another customer who says, I need to understand this about our product, I need to understand that about our product. So I think that's a very, very important point.
Just to add to what Sapna and Sid said earlier, I definitely feel having the right set of mentors and advisors surrounding the startup is really key. Building that network really early on, you'll need that throughout your journey in different capacities. The other piece is just going back to the outsourcing point that I think Sid had made, like around boxing yourself into a certain area. So I'm kind of on the receiving end of that. We work with a lot of high-tech companies, enterprises, and I would suggest for a startup, given the fact that you're going to be morphing, adjusting, learning, changing, setting up your contracts with your outsourcing provider or your partner in that capacity is really important. Because if you kind of set it up in a way that, okay, you're going to deliver X, Y, and Z to me, that's probably going to change to A, B, and C. And then you kind of have to go through that process of dealing with that change and the cost implications and so on. So having a flexible model there, it would be really something you should be thinking about.
That's great. We have about 12 minutes left. I was noticing, so if anyone wants to answer the poll question, that's a great time before we finish. And I wanted to I noticed a question in the chat. Someone was asking about how, how do you feel a good way to, if you're a non-technical founder, to attract a really high quality technical co-founder?
My 2 cents, be passionate. Be passionate. I think that techies are attracted to people who believe in the mission. It's actually hard to motivate technical folks with money to a point. It's much more about seeing their stuff used and loved and consumed. That's what everybody wants. I think of software developers as artists. And I think that people want to see their stuff in the museum or the gallery. They want to know that that's there. So to me, that's the most important thing. If you're passionate about it, you love it, and you can make a good case, because a lot of times technical founders are pretty jaded about business models, right? They've been at it a few times. You should be able to convince them that you have the solution, and if they can build the thing you envision, you can really succeed together and grow and evolve the thing. That's the story I think that works.
Yeah, I agree, and that's not necessarily going to make a successful company, but you're going to attract the right talent to then be able to create a more successful company.
I agree. I think mission-driven companies are very attractive at an early stage and any stage, right? Anything that wakes you up in the morning that has an impact that's beyond your day-to-day work is definitely inspiring. I think another thing that founders can think about when looking at technical founders, technical founders are also people. So the most important thing is when you're looking for a co-founder or early stage, leaders at the company, you want synergy, you want alignment in values, you want somebody that you spend a lot of time early on. So you want somebody who you enjoy working with. When a lot of like-minded people work together, amazing things come out of it. So really finding that personal value system alignment is also important. And I think that will also resonate with the technical founders. If you meet somebody who's really aligned with you in the way you think, in your value system, they're going to look beyond what they're doing currently and jump ship to work with you.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely do not say that they're just, I picked them because they were enthusiastic, especially don't say that to investors. You should do the usual assessments and due diligence and,
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest is due diligence, because if you're a non-technical person and someone can be throwing around terms and they're always going to look like they're high quality when maybe they aren't, and not just high quality in terms of the architecture or being able to develop product, but being able to work together with people.
Look at their track record, I would say. If they've got experience in this space, proven, right? Have they done this before?
Mm-hmm.
Also leverage your back channel, references. So obviously the person you're looking to hire will provide references, but if you have any common connections on LinkedIn, don't hesitate to reach out and just hear about what people think about them.
Yeah, and how they work, because that can sink or swim your startup. Does it? I don't see any more questions. Maybe I'll just ask a quick question to you guys. We have a few more minutes. Do you have some thoughts on the differences between a standalone startup and some with the enterprise disruptors, which are projects within enterprises that are labeled as trying to shake the company up or bring it to market differently than has been done before?
I can kind of take a stab at that. So I've seen things working well in the enterprise, and then things kind of business as usual. If they might, like an enterprise might create like this innovation lab that's building out products, capabilities. Clearly, they have a lot of marketing and support, dollars available to them. But however, a lot of times what I've seen is those types of innovation labs don't necessarily impact the business significantly. If they're not left to drive things on their own and truly be entrepreneurial to create a product that's out there. In another scenario, working with a financial services firm, I have actually seen where actually it's a local example in Boston, where a small bank actually spun out like a lending product, and now they're basically a startup. They had a great traction within the bank, and then they spun that out as a startup on their own. So clearly I've seen both, where one is, the first angle is, that's business as usual, it just feels good, but the second is truly making an impact.
Yeah, great. No, that's great. I had a question did come in about, I think maybe Sid, this is towards you. What types of metrics do you guys feel would be good